Are you very safe? Because there have been reports, in fact I saw one in the London Times Monday, that some agents of the Ugandan government were trailing you.
Sure that security is on their side. So it's also a relative scenario, really. So I think I'm safe in the circumstances.
Now, General,
I'm happy where I am.
Now, General, this might of course sound a little bit ironic.
From General David Sejusa, until recently, the coordinator of Uganda's intelligence agencies. He says he fears retaliation over his recent request for an investigation into reports of plans to assassinate senior military and political officials opposed to what General Sejusa calls the Muhoozi Project. Coming up next, right here on Straight Talk Africa.
Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa. It's Wednesday, July 17th. I am Shaka Ssali.
And hello to you, Shaka, and to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and around the world. I'm Mariama Diallo, your social media reporter.
Today, we'll talk about the recent allegations surrounding the politics of presidential succession in Uganda.
And coming up later, in our STA inbox, you, our audience, have responded to our question of the week through your emails and Facebook comments. We'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
Several media outlets and individuals opposing Ugandan government actions say they have been harassed by security forces. But government officials deny those allegations and say they have the constitutional authority to detect and prevent crime. Is the time to stifle criticism in order to maintain the peace simply in the eye of the beholder? My colleague Paul Cisco has more.
Ugandan general and former senior intelligence chief David Sejusa is living in exile. Kizza Besigye, a key opposition voice to President Yoweri Museveni's administration, has been repeatedly arrested and occasionally beaten. Besigye and others voicing dissent are reportedly under surveillance for protests and actions government officials say are aimed at overthrowing the government. Newspapers and broadcasters have been raided, searched, and temporarily shut down by Ugandan security forces looking for evidence they believe will incite violence. General Sejusa left Kampala after calling for a probe into an assassination plot linked to President Yoweri Museveni's alleged succession plan. The plan involves handing over power to Museveni's son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba. Critics of President Museveni and the Ugandan army say Muhoozi has been promoted too quickly through the ranks, entering the military in 1999. The government denies the existence of a succession plan. Sejusa, one of Uganda's most senior officials, told VOA correspondent Peter Clody he was only doing his duty by calling for an investigation into claims of a plot to assassinate officials opposing the son's rapid rise.
You do not promote a person from a private in 10 years to a general. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. There is no doubt that on the surface of it, everything points at something basically wrong with the way the president has been handling the issues of his son.
President Museveni has been in power since 1986. He changed the Constitution in 2005 to remove term limits. General Sejusa was asked if he fears for his life.
It's not only my life which is in danger, but the lives of many leaders in that country, because the political system has broken down. There is anarchy, and there is panic, and there is fear within the political fabric of the state. And the only way to rein in all these upcoming voices of dissent is through force and repression.
Mr. Museveni has been hailed by many observers for returning the rule of law to Uganda and improving a troubled economy. But recently, the president has faced some criticism that he has been in power too long. Paul Cisco, VOA News.
Thanks, Paul, for that report. Now, joining us here in our Washington studios is our distinguished guest, Dr. Joel Balkan, Senior Associate of Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies a bipartisan foreign policy think tank based here in Washington. It's a pleasure, of course, always, frankly, having you on this program, Joel.
Shaka, it's good to be with you as always.
Thank you so much. And joining us from our London studios is General David Sejusa. Until recently, he served as the coordinator for the Ugandan intelligence agencies. Well, General, I have to say that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host you on Straight Talk Africa for the first time.
Thank you very much. I must say I'm extremely delighted to be hosted on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you so much. And
good evening, viewers.
Good evening to you too. Later in the program, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to call and talk with our guests. The number to call is 202-619-3111, and the U.S. country code is 1. Before we begin today's discussion, we would like to inform you that we extended an invitation to Oliver Woneka, the Ugandan ambassador here in Washington, but she declined due to circumstances beyond her control. We are continuing to reach out to other Ugandan officials for their response, including military spokesperson Colonel Pade Ankunda. In fact, Colonel Ankunda, if you are watching or listening, please call us at U.S. country code is 1-202-382-8298. I repeat, the U.S. country code is 1, and the number is 202-382-8298. That's 1-202-382-8298. Let me come to you immediately, General. First of all, good evening, and how are you?
I'm quite okay. I'm quite okay, Brother Shaka. I'm fine. I would say I'm fine. Yes.
Are you very safe? Because there have been reports, in fact, I saw one in the London Times Monday, that some agents of the Ugandan government were trailing you.
I'm safe as any person who is standing up to a regime run amok could be. But it could be worse. What about all those people who are languishing in jail, others who have died and left behind their dear ones? So I would say really, this is just a small price to pay for freedom. No. In any case, the idea of safety is also relative, because all people who are struggling, or even those people who think that they are very safe with bankers, the way they end up does not always show that security is on their side. So it's also a relative scenario, really. So I think I'm safe in the circumstances.
Now, General,
I'm happy where I am.
Now, General, this might, of course, sound a little bit ironic, because there are some people, in fact, who look at you and say, you know, you used to be the hunter, and now it looks like you are the hunted. If that were to be true, how does it feel for you, really?
That's a good question. That's a good question. In a way, you are right. In a way, you are right. But what I must say is that hunting has differences. There is a illegal hunting. Even if it was hunting, you hunt according to the law. But then when you start hunting outside the law, you are called a poacher. You cease to be a hunter.
Interesting.
So while I was doing my job, I was doing my job within the principles of the law. I never broke the codes of conduct or the rules and operational procedures, contrary to what is happening now, where you have a regime going to other capitals of other countries, trying to look for people and to harm them. So I think that is a different scenario, and I think I should be absolutely differentiated from that type of hunting.
If I remember correctly, General, as a young man, more than 30 years ago, you went to the bush under the leadership of Ugandan incumbent President Yoweri Museveni, And the argument at the time was that you guys were actually liberators. You were fighting to restore democracy. You came back in '86, seized the power, as it were, and since then, President Museveni has actually been saying that he brought democracy to the people of Uganda. As a matter of fact, his spokesman, Tamale Mirundi, is on record saying that Uganda now has total democracy. So, would you agree or disagree with some of those statements by your former commander-in-chief?
Well, it's not the first time in history that we have got people who have sold out and subverted the ideals for which they stood for in the past. There is no doubt that the reasons which took us to the bush in 1980, 81, up to 86, was to liberate our people from the regimes of terror of the time. Unfortunately, with time, we have ended up doing exactly what we went to fight against, including abuses against our people, including incredible corruption, including breaking of constitutional rule, including real abuse of power, because the highest mode of corruption is abuse of power, be it personal power, be it state power. These are the things you see at play. I saw some of the captions you showed, how the opposition leaders are being handled, how senior leaders of the movement now are in exile, how people are dying, and you see how parliament is being subverted. So the situation, but it's not the first time that you have some of these instances, especially when you have a leadership which has overstayed in power. There is nothing surprising about that. After all, Judas was the most trustworthy disciple. As you know, he used to keep the money. He was the financial controller, but you know how he ended up. Mm-hmm. So there is nothing new about that. This is the scenario we have in Uganda today.
Now, General Sejusa, you are probably one of the fewest insiders, really, as it were, that has since split with the movement government, as it were, again, under President Yoweri Museveni. I guess the logical question would be, why now? You've been with Museveni since the early 80s up to this year. Why now? And in fact, looking at your record, back in 1997, you tried to leave and didn't leave. Why should people trust you now that you are really serious and you are ready to take on your former commander-in-chief?
Yeah, thank you. You see, you are right, because those are the occupational hazards of serving a dictatorship. Ultimately, you are stuck in there, and your credibility suffers. But as you have pointed out, my history speaks for itself. It's not the first time that I'm moving out. I've been standing to this regime, some of its excesses. I did so in the Constituent Assembly, you remember, in 1994-95. It brought me a lot of problems. I stood up. By the way, these are public, times when I stood against the regime publicly. I'm not talking about quietly within the relevant forum and so on. And then I stood against the regime in 1996, 97, when I went to court. And I was actually conscripted and put back, as is wont of Mr. Museveni, that you must stay in the military until maybe you die in the military, or until you are useless to do anything, or threaten his power base. So it's not the first time. But at that time, why I went back is that we had, during the constitutional process, we had put their term limits. And therefore, President Museveni would have served up to 2006. at worst. Actually, some people thought he would only stop 2001. But 2005, he did, as usual, renege again on the promises he had made and changed the constitution. So maybe you are right. It was a failure on my part of judgment. I should have done what I'm doing today. I should have done it in 1996, 97, and 98, become an outlaw, in quotation marks, and gone to exile or gone to fight the regime as I'm doing now, you know, resisting it in whatever form. But I must say that this is not the first time. But when you are resisting a dictatorship or someone who abuses his power, you are a captive within that system, such an extent that you must be held by that collective guilt. And this is the unfortunate part, even with those comrades who are still at home and trying to serve the dictatorship. They must know that the brand will somehow hang over around their necks. So you are right in a way. But yes, this is not the first time that I have stood up to this regime.
I see. Before we pause for a short break, we would like to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is on the social networking website Facebook. Just enter the keyword Straight Talk Africa. Become a fan and join the conversation with the other friends of the Voice of America. We'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
Here is a quick timeline of Ugandan political monarchy and assassination plot. In January 1986, Yoweri Museveni assumes office as Ugandan president. On April 29th of this year, General David Sejusa requests an investigation into claims that top government officials may have plotted to assassinate colleagues. On May 1st, President Museveni comes under fire over an alleged failure to tackle Uganda's corruption and his reluctance to cede power. On May 20th, Uganda closes several newspaper and radio outlets for 10 days for carrying reports about an alleged Museveni succession plan involving his son, Kainerugaba Muhoozi. On May 21st, General Sejusa denies leaking his petition to the press after a newspaper published the contents of the letter demanding the inquiry.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. U.S. country code 1. When you call, remember the following. Ask only one question. Keep your comment brief and turn down the volume on your radio or television. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gizui. Let me come to you, Joel Balkan. You've actually been one of the key observers, frankly, of political developments in East Africa for quite some time now, for a very long time, having in fact done your part of your graduate degree in the political science at Makerere, the prestigious Makerere University in Kampala back in the 60s.
That's true. I first visited Uganda in 1962 as an undergraduate student and then went back to do research in Uganda for my doctoral dissertation in 1966 and 67. Actually, my daughter was born in Mulago Hospital.
Mulago Hospital?
Yes, indeed.
Very interesting. I remember, of course, meeting you in Uganda several years ago, and we had lunch somewhere in a restaurant in Nakasero.
We did. We had a very good matoke, as I recall.
That is correct. Now, you've listened to General Sejusa's allegations or positions vis-a-vis, of course, the government in Kampala, a government, by the way, that frankly owes a lot to him, because this was a young man after Makerere joined the police and joined the liberation struggle as it were, and so many years later, he doesn't seem, frankly, to put any value on what he fought for. Is he being fair when you look back?
I don't think he's being unfair. He knows the situation within the Army and with respect to the succession far better than I do. But generally speaking, this is a government that has been on a slow and steady decline since roughly 1998 and certainly 2001. Rising corruption, as he noted, particularly the third term and then the fourth term. And to put it very succinctly, a man who was once described as one of the new leaders of Africa, along with Meles Zenawi, in fact resembles the old. There is no difference between Yoweri Museveni of 2013 and Daniel Arap Moi of 1992 or Mobutu Sese Seko of that period. This is a classic big man rule that maintains power through patronage, and patronage is sustained through rising corruption because we have a situation of what I call inflationary patronage. Leaders of regimes of this nature need to dish out more and more resources in order to just stay in place. And eventually, like all inflationary situations, they're overwhelmed. They start to print money, which is what Moi did in 1992, and which in fact occurred in Uganda prior to the last election, while you had a very rapid rise in inflation then. So Museveni is under a lot of pressure these days. There were aspects about the early years of his governance that were extraordinarily good. We know them with respect to AIDS and the rising economy. But the fact of the matter is the economy has been declining the last year, and AIDS is rising, and social services are declining, and these are the realities.
You seem to agree with some people, in fact, who have suggested that if the Museveni of 1986 to 1996 were to meet the Museveni of post-1996 up today, that they probably would go to war. That one would probably be a Konye, a Joseph Konye, and the other one would be the liberation fighter, Yoweri Museveni. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'm not sure they would go to war, and I certainly wouldn't suggest that someone going into resistance, as Museveni did back in the 80s, would be akin to Kony. He would be more of a liberator rather than a savage a thug who commits terrorism on his own people. So I wouldn't make the analogy with Kony at all. But the fact of the matter is, this is what happens when regimes stay in power too long. The 1995 Constitution, which the General referred to, was actually quite a democratic process that brought it into being. It had term limits, and I think it's very important to remember that 22 countries in Africa have voted for term limits, and only two, to my knowledge, Uganda and Namibia, have overturned term limits, and even in Namibia, term limits is now adhered to. And so you've had the regular turnover of governance, even if the same party has maintained itself in power, in Tanzania, for example, in Namibia more recently, and in other countries like Malawi and Zambia, where there's been an alternation of power, and Kenya too. Even Daniel Arap Moi, although he came to term limits late, abided by his constitution.
Yeah, but term limits now, seem to be really an endangered species, because you can go to Chad, you can go to Guinea-Conakry, you can go to Cameroon, you can go to a lot of countries, including Algeria, which actually have been removing those term limits so that individuals can hang on to power.
I'm not sure it's been removed in all those countries that you suggested, but it's also been adhered to in those that I mentioned, particularly in Eastern and Southern Africa. And let's not forget Nigeria as well, the most populous country on the continent, where General Obasanjo, in many ways in a position very similar to Museveni, tried very hard for a third term.
And failed.
And failed, and he was denied. And Nigeria is better for it.
So was, of course, Frederick Chiluba in Zambia.
Indeed.
And Malawi, of course, Bakiri Muluzi. Let me come to a very important First Lady here in Washington, D.C., Michelle Obama. She once said that becoming a president does not change you. Rather, what it does, it reveals you. Why should we think, frankly, that Yoweri Museveni has actually changed from what he used to be to being what he is today? Isn't it possible that it is those of us who are observers, frankly, who probably have been changing?
No, I would disagree, because when Yoweri Museveni came to power, and particularly after the first 4 or 5 years, you had a dramatic change on the African continent, the transition to democratic governance in South Africa, the end of the Cold War, the expectations of people that democratic governance was the way of the future, not big man, one-party rule. And this is what Museveni said he stood for. It was packaged in a rather unique way under the movement system in Uganda. But as you know, when the Constitution was changed in 2005, Uganda also accepted multi-party politics, as is the trend across the rest of the continent.
I see. Multi-party politics, but really the template pretty much fundamentally remains one-party state, because there is frankly no difference between the ruling party and the state. They are fused. The two are fused.
Well, I would agree with you entirely on that. And the state is Museveni. It's actually not so much a party state. It's a one-man regime who, as I said before, rules through patronage. People acquire office. They acquire access to wealth. The current Prime Minister, Amana Mbabazi, would be a good example. The current Foreign Minister, one of the most corrupt individuals in Africa, who I'm told is about to become President of the General Assembly.
General Assembly next year in September.
This is an embarrassment to the Assembly. Whether it's an embarrassment to Uganda is another question.
I see. But what kind of evidence do you have against Mr. Kutesa, really? He's been exonerated by the local courts?
Well, ask him how he obtained his wealth and the various businesses that he is in. He's acquired these over time. Perhaps it was just good fortune, and he acquired them in that respect. But when you're in positions of power, you do have opportunities that come your way that others do not. And what you also have in Uganda is an expansion of the first family that is somewhat different than other big man regimes. I believe Sam Kutesa's daughter is married to Muhoozi, if I'm not in error on that.
And as a matter of fact, his wife, the late Jennifer, and the Ugandan First Lady were cousins. Cousins.
That I didn't know.
I see. Well, let's go to the telephone. Basically, we have to go to the lifeline of the show, which are the telephone callers, and we do have a one called David here. It's not David versus Goliath here. David from Washington. Good afternoon. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Good afternoon to you, Shaka Ssali.
Hugely terrific. How are you today?
I'm good. I have a couple of questions. I would like to ask the General his view about the raid on the High Court of Uganda in November 2005 by what came to be known as the Black Mamba.
Okay.
And second, I would want to know what his role was in that raid.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair question. Unfortunately, we probably won't be going to the General to answer the questions immediately, because time happens not to be our best ally. I beg your pardon? Hello, Henry, are you there? Henry, are you there? I'm afraid Henry doesn't seem to be on the line. You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa, and we'll have more in our discussion in a moment. But first, here is Mariama Diaro herself. Take it away, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. Still to come, we'll reveal some of the fantastic feedback covering all angles we've received from our audience through social media. But now, here is our letter of the week. Joseph Richard Conte from Lusaka, Zambia writes, "We are all brought up to know the difference between right and wrong. And if you witness your government or its people doing wrong, should you turn a blind eye? Does that not make you just as guilty? Too many government officials think that they are untouchable and above the law. Since when was exposing criminals and or telling the truth a crime?
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow VOA on Twitter. Join VOA on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join VOA.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number 202-619-3111. And the U.S. country code is 1. Call us collect and we'll pay for the call. Or call directs and we'll call you right back. Remember to keep your questions brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gizui, and welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. Once again, it's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Mariama Diarra herself. Take it away again, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. As you've been discussing, General David Sejusa, who demanded an inquiry into an alleged assassination plot linked to President Yoweri Museveni's succession plan, is indeed under fire. Until he went into exile, the general was the coordinator for Uganda's intelligence agencies in the president's office. Sejusa says it was his duty to call for the probe, since the succession plan could destabilize the country. The army has rejected his claims and is accusing him of breaching an official code of conduct. This brings us to our question of the week, which stated, if a government official that has sworn allegiance to his sovereign state reveals classified information, are they a traitor or a patriot? If so, why? Well, let's start with a comment from Moses Adejo from Kaduna in Nigeria, who writes, the person would be a traitor. They swore allegiance to the sovereignty of the country and broke the oath of secrecy. Another post comes from Chikumbutso Chiweza from Malawi. He told us that he's originally from Lilongwe but is now living in Zomba. And he says, first we have to look at cases in which classified information can be revealed. If it is revealed for the common good of all citizens, then he is a hero. However, for this reason, I don't mind calling him a traitor. Well, Shaka, both basically put the person who would do something like that in the traitor bag, although one raised an interesting point about cases in which revealing classified information would be okay. You know,
Mariam and Joel, I'm reminded by a great American author and icon by the name Mark Twain. He once wrote that patriotism is supporting your country all the time, and your government when it deserves it. What about that?
Oh, I'm not going to disagree with Mark Twain. I thought you were going to quote that patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels, which is the more oft-quoted analogy to patriotism. Yes, people of all countries wrap themselves in the flag very sanctimoniously so, when often they are guilty of misdeeds.
Well, what about the point raised by actually our letter of the week that's asked, that said that does swearing allegiance actually, does it mean turning a blind eye on things that you psychologically don't agree with?
Well, if of course, if you're a government official and you swear allegiance to that, it is something that you have to keep in mind. But I think if for some reason it affects your conscience, I think, frankly, you could take the moral high ground and call it what it is.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to another posting at this time to Modu Mari Gai. He is originally from Gambia, a country right next to mine, right next to Senegal, but is now living in the United Kingdom. And he writes, the worst traitors are the ones coming overseas to seek political asylum only to reveal all classified information just to have a residential permit, which is selfish and a nation sellout. But then I wonder, where would the viewer suggest for those people to go to? Anyways, I'm sure we can probably answer that question in a little bit. We're going to go on to another posting from Stanley Ndagire from Kampala in Uganda, and who says they are just fighting for their own personal benefits and egos, and not for the benefit of our country. After all, we don't want to be ruled by generals anymore. Shaka, do you think this is actually a fight of egos?
Not necessarily, because history being our instruction, you can look back during the Second World War and look at one great tall general, General de Gaulle. General de Gaulle took refuge not only, by the way, in the United Kingdom, but actually in what used to be called Congo-Brazzaville. The headquarters of the French Republic was temporarily in Africa. You can't possibly say that that man did a wrong thing to be exiled rather than to commit political suicide. What about you, Joel?
Well, you're asking me to comment on de Gaulle. I'm not a specialist on Europe, but I would say that de Gaulle was known for having one of the biggest egos of all. So, yes, he fought on for the Free French, but his ego was enormous, drove Churchill nuts, among others, and I think drove Roosevelt nuts as well.
But he liberated the French people, didn't he, against the Nazis?
Well, the question is, who really liberated France? Let's not get into that debate.
I see. Well, there are people, there are always going to be people that, frankly, have a very good reason as why they should run away, so that they can reorganize, so as to come back and liberate their people, as it were.
And I actually want to give the general a chance to answer the question of the prior viewer who talked about the fact that people who reveal classified information are only doing it to get some type of asylum in the West. So I want to hear his take on that one.
He will get to that. He will get to that, Mariama. Thanks so much for everything that you have shared for us so far.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. That's all the feedback we have for today. Once again, thanks everybody for logging in and making your voices heard. Just a reminder, we'd like to hear from you, so drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com. Or post your comments on our Facebook page. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Be sure to visit us online as well at voaafrica.com. And you can join our YouTube channel by subscribing to VOA TV to Africa. Now, let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program. Next week on Straight Talk Africa, Zimbabwe, where preliminary voting has begun for general and presidential elections scheduled for July 31st. Security forces that will be on duty that day voted on Sunday. Amnesty International and others accuse the police of intimidation and say the election process is disorganized, underfunded, and flawed. That's next week, right here on Straight Talk Africa.
Well, hello, Henry. Good evening, Henry from South Africa. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Shaka. How are you doing?
Hugely terrific. Hugely terrific. What is your question, sir?
My question to General Sejusa is that since he has been with the government of President Museveni since its inception in 1980 or 1986, would he be having some clues on how we can remove the dictatorship of President Museveni?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Over to you, General Sejusa in London. First, of course, you had earlier a question from David from Washington, D.C. which I believe had something to do with what he called the Black Mamba saga back in 2005. It's all yours, General.
Thank you, Shaka.
You're most welcome, sir.
I will talk briefly about, you see, going into the different excesses that have been committed is really to address the wrong issue here, be it the Black Mamba, be it the abuse of the political leaders from the opposition and so on. It all boils to abuse of power by the person in charge of state affairs. The person who asked me about the raid on the High Court, I wish to inform him that the Chief Justice is the third seniorest person in the country, in hierarchy of power in the country. No one can raid a High Court without the express authority and instruction of the highest office of the country. It never happens. No one can raid. It's like raiding the State House. You cannot raid Parliament because Speaker is the second in hierarchy to the President, politically. Chief Justice is third. Therefore, we all know where the abuse originates. There is no question about that. So I wouldn't want to go into that these were coming from military intelligence, these were coming from, that is irrelevant. As long as there is a dictator who is in charge and abusing power, there is no, because you see a leader must account for the power they hold. If you don't, then abuse of power takes different forms. You can raid a court, you can abuse political leaders, you can steal people's property. People, you know, they cannot get the justice within the political, rather the legal regime. So it takes different forms. Therefore, I wouldn't want to...
But General, yes. What about a very ordinary person, frankly, looking at this thing called the government? How do you convince that person that there is only this one man? For example, in the case of Uganda, a one General Yoweri Museveni, retired, but certainly not tired in any way at all, that he's the only guy that calls the shots. What about the generals surrounding him like you?
Yes, that is an important point too. You see, that is the real crisis of the African neo-colonial state. Its structure, the structural behavior of the African state. That's the challenges, even when you talk about issues of democratization, issues of accountability, issues of control. There is no way, if a system does not run on systems, on defined modes of operation, there is no way it can check power of an individual. It is known world over. It's been tested and known. Like your colleague has said in the studio, once a system runs on patronage, runs on a neat family, cabal of people, and then uses all corrupt methods of sustaining power, including force, including bribery, including trickery, really. There is no reason. I can give you many examples, as you know, that anyone who has tried to speak out, be him a general, be him a member of the cabinet, has had to be dealt with. Either they frame charges against him, or they will arrest him, or they will get another way of dealing with him. Therefore, when you say one person, a system evolves where it's no longer a person, but it's people who think there is nothing that can be done about it. So they join the bandwagon. And those are very many, even now. That's why you see not everybody is going, because the cost is very high. If you speak against some of these issues or some of these abuses, then you face an existential threat. So it is true, he has a system which he has woven over time, a system of power, even of corruption, because as we speak now, corruption has generated a power center of its own. You cannot say that anyone can just remove it, but it has become a system of political management. Corruption in Uganda now is a mechanism to manage the country politically.
Time Time is not
Yes.
our best, so I will come back later.
So,
a reminder that you are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. Today's topic, we're talking about the recent allegations surrounding the politics of presidential succession in Uganda. If you wish to participate in our discussion, please call us at 202-619-3111. US country code is 1. We'll continue our discussion in a moment, so please don't go away.
Once again, here is a quick timeline of Ugandan political monarchy and assassination plot. On May of this year, General Sejusa leaves Uganda for a self-imposed exile after he says his life was threatened. On June 18, Uganda's spokesman Afwono Opondo denies that General Sejusa will be arrested if he returns to Uganda. On the same date, General Sejusa reiterates to BBC allegations of a plot to, quote, assassinate people who disagree with his so-called family project of holding onto power in perpetuity, unquote. On the same day, on June 18, spokesman Opondo denies there were any, quote, family projects that would lead to Kainerugaba to succeed President Museveni. On June 30th, General Sejusa tells VOA that he's unlikely to return to Uganda anytime soon and that he remains in fear for his life.
Whether you live in Somalia, Senegal, Nigeria, or Zimbabwe, from every corner of sub-Saharan Africa, turn to us for information and experts to help you improve health and life. For you and your family. For your health. Africa Health Network. Only on VOA. If you like today's show, please write and tell us what you think or give us some suggestions. Be sure to tell us what station you're tuned into. Our address, Straight Talk Africa, Voice of America, 330 Independence Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20237 USA. Or send us an email at africatv@voanews.com. Log on to our website at voaafrica.com. Or post your comments on Facebook. Keywords Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back. If you have just joined us, we are talking about the recent allegations surrounding the politics of presidential succession in Uganda. Our distinguished guests are Dr. Joel Barukan, Senior Associate of Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a bipartisan foreign policy think tank, also based here in Washington. And joining us from our London studios is General David Sejusa, until recently the coordinator of the Ugandan intelligence agencies. We would like to repeat that we extended an invitation to Oliver Woneka, the Ugandan ambassador here in Washington, to participate in today's program, but she declined due to circumstances beyond her control. Well, gentlemen, I have to say once again that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you.
Thank you.
Good to be back.
You're most welcome. Now, General Sejusa, you had a question before the break from Henry in South Africa.
Yes.
And before you answer it, I might add that you remember that back in 2001, President Yoweri Museveni appealed to his Ugandan supporters to back him for the last term so that he can accomplish three important things. One, if I recall correctly, was to professionalize the army. The second one was to secure an economic regional integration. The third one was to choose a successor. How far has he gone so far? This is 2013. That was 2001. Do you have a professional army now in Uganda?
The problem of professionalizing the army in Uganda is a non-starter. The question of professionalization is not like quantum physics, something which is difficult to comprehend. Way back in BC, people like Hammurabi of Babylon had already codified how you can professionalize. So you can see there are specific tenets which can be fulfilled in order to determine whether an institution is professional or not. It's not only on management, it also extends actually in issues of accountability, doctrine, national security policy, like in terms of the army, training, promotion, deployment, benefits, a lot of things. So actually what we have in Uganda is unprofessionalizing the army. Because a professional army, among other things, is its outlook. It must subscribe to civilian authority. It must not be partisan. These are some key tenets, the key tenets of a professional army. Today, as we speak, I can give you an example. Shaka, you find that a former chief of defense forces was removed from command. And he has been appointed, for instance, a minister of internal affairs. But the articles of the constitution, like 208 and so on, are very clear. The army UPDF is non-partisan. Yet a minister is an implementer of a partisan manifesto of the ruling party. But you see, you can't do anything because there is no constitutional rule. There is personal rule. If you go, I can tell you that as we speak today, my view, for instance, today, how do you retire from the army? Who promotes who? How do you access training? Who determines on the welfare? These are issues which professionalizing the army handles. Well, and they must be codified.
So what is the way forward? What is the way forward? If you were to respond to the gentleman from South Africa, what is the way forward? How do you remove what you call a dictator in Kampala?
Of course, the way forward is, first of all, the people of Uganda have long known this, that there has been a retrogression. There's no doubt about it, that the country is moving backward. The professor there told you, HIV/AIDS had fallen 5%. In some cases, it's back to 30 now. We can no longer talk. We had talked about universal primary education. Because of corruption, schools have collapsed. We had excelled in immunization. Health services have collapsed. We were talking about security. Roadblocks are back. And arresting people, you know what we call pandagari. You come and gather children and wives at midnight, take them for screening. This is what Obote was doing in Urwera and so on. They are all back. Therefore, these issues are not new in Uganda anymore, but they were not exposed to the international community, whom Mr. Museveni has learned to play.
I see.
Because yes, absolutely, because he identifies their interests, because countries pursue their national interests.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that. We'll come to that,
yes.
General. We'll come to that. Let's go to Kampala. Let's go to Kampala. Mr. Kizito would like to talk to you. Good evening, Mr. Kizito. You're welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Yeah, good evening. This is Mr. Kizito calling.
Usually terrific.
Yeah,
what is your question, sir?
My question for Mr. Sejusa is this. Several years back, Colonel Cesar Besige dropped out of NRM. Mugisha Muntu did the same. Sam Munjuba and so Major John Kazora. So if really they did that, and Mr. Sejusa is coming up right now, that is saying that there's a lot of dictatorship in Uganda and what. Yeah, we embrace that and it's there. But why does it come up at this time? Yet his predecessors, like Besige, they stood and they were among the people who tear gas us, who are behind arresting Besige. And now he's assuming that this is the time whereby we can get the perfect leadership. So I want him to elaborate more about that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's go to Ghana and come to the General. Good evening, Tafa. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa. Tafa, can you hear me? General, go for it, please. General, go for it. Respond to Mr. Christian Kampala. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Kizito, and thank you, Shaka. You see, he's absolutely right, but I would want to inform Mr. Kizito and the other listeners that it's not so obvious to be retired from the army. For instance, when Dr. Besige retired, it was like an error. It was like an error in 1993 after he wrote that article. And then later on, he was about to be court-martialed. and then he went on to challenge President Museveni in electoral politics. It has become extremely difficult to have anyone leave the military. You can only leave the military in 3 ways, maybe in Uganda. Maybe if you are dead. We had a person called Ezaruku who died at 90, at 80, and he was still a serving officer. And there are men of that nature. Or if you are too old or too sick to challenge Mr. Museveni's projects of power, or if you can do his bidding, if he can release you from the army, you stand in an electoral position and you canvass support for him. But if you have your other ideas, you'll never leave that army. Therefore, that answers the question of Mr. Kizito. Why now? Because even those ones who retired at that time, it was by default. And later on, a decision was taken by Mr. Museveni that retirement right now. That's why now he's finding it very difficult to retire General Ronda.
So how do you deal with him, General? Time is not our best ally.
We shall deal with him. We are dealing, first of all, it is increasing the consciousness of our people and giving them hope.
Civic
that
education.
Change is possible. Yes, education. That change is possible. Secondly, it is to stand up to these abuses. People must start knowing that the long-term cost of not standing up, the long-term cost is very painful and it cannot be avoided.
I see.
The country will ultimately collapse. Therefore, people will have to stand up against this abuse.
Now, Joel, what about the U.S. government vis-a-vis the Uganda government, really? What about these two relationships? To what extent, frankly, Obama talks the talk about, promoting democracy in Africa, but does he really walk the talk when it comes to countries like Uganda, to countries like Egypt?
Well, I'm sorry to say that you have put your finger on an awkward point. The president gave a wonderful articulation of U.S.-Africa policy recently in Cape Town, where he talked about democracy, expanding trade and investment, and security. And yet the implementation of that policy has varied considerably from one country to the next. So we've pursued it fairly vigorously in places like Nigeria, in Kenya, and in others. But you get two countries in particular, Uganda and Ethiopia, have been given a pass. We are still seem to be living in the 20 years ago when Museveni was regarded as one of the new leaders of Africa and not facing up to the reality. Much of this is because of security arrangements in Somalia, but the general's absolutely right. President Museveni has played the Western powers like a violin in respect to telling them what they want to hear. So, for example, the passage of the Uganda equivalent of the Patriot Act was a way of dealing with the Bush administration. And sorry to say, President Obama, in many respects, has just continued the Bush policy vis-a-vis Museveni that his predecessor did.
General, in 30 seconds, do you have, or to what extent do you have political ambitions?
First of all, politically, I was a freedom fighter. When I left school and joined the struggle, I did not go to support President Museveni to rule until he's dead in office. I went to cause qualitative change. So to begin with, mine was a political struggle. And once you are involved in a political struggle, you must have political ambitions. So there is no shying about that.
Unfortunately, General, time is not our best ally. On that note, thanks to our distinguished guests, Dr. Joel Barukan, Senior Associate of Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and General David Sejusa, who until recently served as the coordinator for the Ugandan intelligence agencies. He joined us from our studios in London. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in. If you are listening to us on the Voice of America, special English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning, it's Daybreak Africa with James Bate. Also, don't forget, tune into Voice of America's Africa 54, a 30-minute daily TV magazine program that features what's trending in news, health, sports, and lifestyle. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning into Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not bitter. And please remember to keep the African hopes alive.